I'm going to be talking today about the contractor's dilemma. Should they go for growth or should they hunker down? So, for those of you who don't know who are BESA, you will recognize some of our members. We have about 880, including BSS, but all the major M&E contractors, we have 27 out of the top 30 in membership, and 73% of our membership turn over more than 3 million. So they're your customers. And it's interesting to hear what they're telling you compared to what they're telling us. But they're your customers that we represent. And we also operate Skill Card, and I'll come into a bit more on that later, and RefCom, which is the F-gas register, which has 7,500 companies registered with it, so 7,500 members. And we own and operate SFG20, which is the de facto maintenance standard for the built environment. And that's growing 40% a year at the moment, and we'll come into the reasons for that shortly. So, I was a contractor for 25 years, and I bear the scars, so I intend to be hung for a sheep, not for a lamb. So if I'm controversial, it's quite deliberate, and I don't apologise for that, but I hope it reflects the world you actually operate in rather than the one we all wish we operated in. And I guess the question is, how did the industry deliver this? How did we deliver Grenfell? Because without the context of where the industry is and where the industry is likely to go, how can you work out whether you should go for growth or hunker down? The day after Grenfell, and we had an office at the time quite close, so I used to cycle by it. I did a tweet that said, I don't know what the causes of the Grenfell fire are, but I recognised the culture that would deliver it. And I think we would all recognise the culture that allowed it to be delivered. And if you do nothing else after listening to me today, I'd urge you to listen to the Grenfell Inquiry podcasts. Because I have to tell you that many people in our industry, many of our members, as far as they are concerned, Grenfell happened in another country. It's about cladding, it's about facades, it's about the fire service. It's nothing to do with us. And they haven't quite got the message yet. It's everything to do with us. This is part of it. How did we have Carillion? We all knew about Carillion. The government knew about Carillion. Civil servants in Department of Business were saying to me, who are the worst at payment, for example? And we say, well, you know the answer to that, it's Carillion. Yet at the same time, they were giving them HS2 tunnel contracts when they actually, if they followed the stuff that's now in the construction playbook, they shouldn't have got a painting and decorating job in Leeds. But they kept getting work. And they kept getting work on that basis that they're too big to fail. Well, that didn't quite work. So what is the culture that I'm talking about when I say the culture that delivered Grenfell? Every client, every project pretty much starts out, they want an exemplar project. They want something like this. They want to win the Sterling Prize. They want to be net zero. They want to do everything. And we go away, not us at this stage, but the consultant team go away and they design a building that meets that criteria. And at this stage, they're asking you for what's the embodied carbon of this and what's the best sustainable solution. We want it to be BREEAM outstanding. We want all of those things. And then it gets to the position where we have to buy the products. And we buy the products at the cheapest possible price, put the building together, and lo and behold, it looks like this. Except I would argue, it looks more like this. And you want the lift contract on this, wouldn't you, by and large? So when I say it looks like this, what do I mean by that? And it's about this. It's about the performance gap. Now, I'm playing this for laughs, guys, and I've looked at the rest of the programme for today, and there aren't many laughs in sustainable pipework things, so you've got to take them where they're coming. The performance gap. So this is where we get a bit interactive. Could anybody tell me what the average building, how much excess energy it uses from the design intent? Would anybody like to shout out a guess? Because I hope I can hear you. In percentage terms. 10%, 20, 30, 36, higher. This is a competition now. 50, higher.
70.
Higher.
90.
Higher. 200%. 200%. I'll be giving out prizes later. That's a staggering figure, isn't it? 200%. How can we possibly have buildings that use 200% more energy than we designed them for? Well, I'll tell you how. As an industry, we offer them a Volkswagen Golf. That's what we say we're going to do. And then we deliver a Skoda and we tell them it's exactly the same thing. Now, usually at this point, somebody will say in the audience, hey, I've got a Skoda, it's a very good car. And it is, but it's not the one I bought. What we deliver is a facsimile, something that looks like the thing that they designed and bought. They've swapped out something for something else. Now, why is that? In construction, we're under the misapprehension that the client wants a building. They don't. It's a return on investment. And that actually still applies if it's a hospital or a school needs a return on that capital investment. It's not about a building. And if you think about it that way, there are three things that are required for a building. It needs to be on spec, on time, and on budget. Except the on-spec bit is entirely optional. And when I say entirely optional, not a single building or owner has ever been prosecuted for a failure to comply with Part L of building regulations, which is about energy conservation. Not one. And there's a reason I chose the walkie-talkie, because that's one of the few buildings to be prosecuted for a failure to comply with what they put in for planning. And can anybody tell me why? And it's not the Soleil Breeze. The roof garden isn't to the same size as they put in for planning, which tells you everything you need to know about how we view planning and enforcement. There's zero enforcement. So if there's zero enforcement, who do we land it on? The buyer, caveat emptor. I bought a new flat a few years ago and it has compartmentation issues. I'm the person picking up the bill, not the developer, not the builder, not anybody else involved in it, not the freeholder, the leaseholder. That's insanity. It's displayed as a victimless crime. Nobody gets hurt in this. Well, now we know after Grenfell that actually people do get hurt. And the people who pick up the tab are your customers, the M&E contractors, who actually have their margin squeezed, don't get paid, don't get their retention money, the leaseholders or the tenants who have to pay that 200% additional energy bill because it doesn't meet the requirements. The people who developed it have trousered their bonus and disappeared over the horizon. And yet that building will be there 200 years, 300 years, 500 years. Yet there's no accountability, no responsibility. Could you put your hand up here for a UK taxpayer? Nobody got offshore accounts, nobody in the government clearly around here. Then you're also victims. Because if you have a 200% deficit on every single building, we have to build this, which is Hinkley C. So we have to generate more energy to make up for the energy we are wasting. And remember, the energy that escapes through the holes in the fabric, through the poor design, through the poor installation, is where the smoke and fire will also get through. It's almost impossible to build a building badly just for energy. If it's crap, it's all crap. Not just bits of it, it's all crap. But nobody does the commissioning properly, or rarely. It's a rare thing. You've all seen commissioning programs go from 6 weeks to 6 days to 6 hours till we'll do it once we've moved in. How on earth then do you prove that the thing you have bought or the thing that you've had built for you meets the criteria that you met at the beginning? But it gets worse. Could anybody tell me what's the most likely way you will die in construction? Fall. Suicide. It's suicide. 2 people a day in the UK and Ireland commit suicide. Now, you think about the pressure that your customers are under. I remember the pressure of being a contractor every day and dreading that phone call. I used to be a member of BESA, and I'd go and sit in a council meeting or a technical committee meeting, and I'd come out and there'd be 10 or 20 messages in the day where people phoned you instead of messaging you. Lots of voicemails. Funnily enough, not one of those was phoning me to say what a lovely guy I was and how nice it was, what a great job I'm doing. It was just a degree of how much of a what's it I was and how bad it was. The pressure that we put on people. So what we're doing is delivering broken buildings, and I'd evidence that through the energy performance gap of 200%, and broken people. The whole process is broken. I started my career in the Navy, in submarines. And I initially did diesel-based, then went to nuclear. Are there any submariners in the room before I go on? It's always a dangerous moment. No? Good. Then I can tell you what I like, can't I? And we used to spend our time going out of Faz Lane, turning right and chasing Russians. This is a Russian ballistic submarine. And we used to follow them for sometimes weeks on end. But they didn't always go out on their own. They usually had a couple of people following them to make sure we weren't following them, if you get me. And if we thought we were being followed, we had a process that was called Granny's Footsteps. So Granny's Footsteps, you know, they shuffle. What you do is you don't do massive alterations of course, you do tiny alterations of course. 0.5 degree, 2 degrees, 1 degree, over a prolonged period of time. So just small changes of direction. And after about 20 minutes, they've lost you because they're expecting you to make a big change or continue on the same course. But little Granny's Footsteps means that they've lost you and you're heading off over there and they're going there and they go, where's he gone? What do we do in construction? Everybody breaks spec by a little bit. 0.5% here. You know, in the dry lining, you use a different screws, they use a different metal. In our industry, you're 2%, we change the pumps out, we change the pipe work, we change something which looks the same, but isn't. Those little 0.5%, 2%, 1%, they all add up to 200%. That's how it happens. What we have is a culture, and what I hear from my members, and I'm interested to hear what you think about this, but there's a lot of talk at the beginning when they want the Sterling Prize about they want the most sustainable product, they want the best quality products, until it gets to the point where they go, you can't afford this building, and then it's lowest price. Lowest price, quick as you can. We'll deal with that problem later. And of course, everything is hurry-scurry. We're on site before we're required to be on site. We're putting up ceilings before we've finished to make a room look finished. It's a hurry-scurry industry. You deliver materials to site, not because they're required, but because you need to get paid. And that's a good way of releasing a bit of cash. All of these things, hurry-scurry. And then we talk about terrible productivity in construction. Is it a wonder? Is it a wonder? All of it simply drives up our costs because we're working inefficiently. One of the lessons of lockdown surprise, surprise, was when people had to plan to get to site, productivity rose. Who knew that planning might be a good idea? But it is, we don't do that by and large, not very well. What we do is we partially design. So another question for the audience. What percentage of design do you think is completed before we start on site, on average? 30? Lower.
20. 10.
Higher.
15.
Higher.
20.
20. Thank you. You can all have a go at this, it's only shouting out a number. 20%. So if you've only designed 20%, how on earth can you start the project? It's a bit like doing a jigsaw puzzle where you don't have the front cover and you're putting the thing together. So what happens, usually somebody gets out a mallet and starts to hammer bits into place to make them fit. And that's what you have. So as an industry, what we really need to do is not focus on products that they buy individually from you, but the building as a product, as an integrated, holistic system. Everything they buy from you in products goes into a single integrated system, which is a building. Can you imagine the Civil Aviation Authority saying to Boeing, for example, this used to be true, I know you haven't fully designed that aircraft, but give it a go down the runway, because you never know, it might stay in the air. But every single building is how we approach this, isn't it? We just, it might work, give it a go, and actually nobody's going to really check anyway. Unless it burns down, we'll be all right. Of course, Boeing messed that one up, but I've left it in there because it kind of makes sense. We're not unique. Back to submarines, this is HMS Astute, first of class. What percentage of the design do you think they'd done before they started to build?
90.
Lower. 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 20. So the next question is, do you think they delivered it on time?
No.
Do you think they delivered it on budget?
No.
No. 1.4 billion over and 4.5 years late. The difference is they're building 8 of them. I think they've just shipped out the 7th now. It's on time, it's on budget, because they know what they're doing. We don't. We build prototypes, by and large. So that's where we are. So when we talk about going for growth or hunkering down, you have to take all that into context, because everybody, as Mike Tyson says, everybody has a plan when they step into the ring until they get the first punch on the nose and all rules are over. And that's how you have to look at the context. So you can have your strategic plan as a contractor, but in the first point you get punched on the nose, it all goes wrong. So there are 2 big things that I think are going to impact us in the coming years. And the first is net zero. Net zero by 2050. If you're a City of London corporation, 2040. And we're looking at decarbonising the power system by 2035. I sit on a thing called the Skills for a Sustainable Skyline, which is City of London Corporation, where we're talking about how we find the skills to deliver net zero by 2040. There are some fundamental questions you have to ask before you work out how many people you need. And they focus on construction heavily, but that's only a fraction of the time the building is going to be there. They're not focused on the sort of 95% of the time when the building is going to be operating. How many people are required to do that and what skills do they need? But also, if you're going to decarbonise, you ought to have the infrastructure in place to be able to support that. And guess what? They haven't. If you want to build in southwest London now, you can't, because there's nothing left in the grid to do that. We don't have an integrated energy policy in the UK. So that's an issue with net zero. It's just not coordinated. You cannot do what you're doing at the moment, which is lack of generation, lack of infrastructure to support that, and do heat pumps and do EVs. But to ministers, heat pumps are the solution because it's neat, simple. doesn't take into account you've got to do all that fabric change to help facilitate it and all that infrastructure. So the next thing, Dame Judith Hackett, Building Safety Act. Just briefly, what's driving the Building Safety Act? Her report, which was on Grenfell, described an industry, and I'll just go through this, but out of that, is there anything in there that you could argue with? There is ignorance, there is indifference, which I described of Grenfell being in another country as far as most members are concerned. There is a lack of enforcement, and there is a lack of requirement to actually evidence that you're competent. The fact you can't do a job in M&E has never stopped you winning a job. That's still true. Our technical helpline for members is frequently given by questions such as, I've just won this contract to do this, can you tell me how I do it? You just won it. So what is the Building Safety Act, which actually came into force in April 23 and actually covers everything in construction except do it yourself. So it will touch everything. And one of the features of it are gateways. Gateways to prevent you, say Gateway 3, from occupying a building unless you can evidence you have a viable fire safety plan in place, which means you really have to have designed it, built it, and evidenced that it works. That should mean the end of value engineering, because to swap out something that you put in your initial design for something cheaper later, you have to evidence that it is the same quality, it is the same performance. It should mean the end of value engineering. I hope so, because we bet the shop on this, as they say, and I'll come on to that in a second. But the only problem is, politicians love to stand with a high-vis jacket and a hard hat on and say, your new hospital is going to be here, which drives you into build and design. Dig a hole, start the project with 20% of the design done, and you are inevitably into build and design. You can't possibly do BIM. You can't possibly do supply chain integration. You can't possibly do any of this value toolkit stuff, construction playbook, if you're designing and building simultaneously, or building and designing. So if the government aren't going to help us, and I don't think we've got any hope with the current government, and probably not much help with a future government, where's it coming from? Well, there may be some drivers. ESG, environmental, social and governance issues, is becoming more and more important. Not as a driver from main contractors, say, or even their clients, but funders. And I think that's, if you're going to influence, we need to influence the funders to say, if you invested in this building, did you actually deliver the building that was supposed to have been delivered? Which, if anybody says to me it's greater cost, that must be rubbish, because surely as a developer, you intended to build the building you put in for planning. That as a minimum meets building regs. That's not unreasonable, is it? Otherwise, we pick up the cost as taxpayers. Second area is insurance. You would hope that to mitigate their risk, insurers will increasingly ask for evidence from contractors. Are you competent? Can you prove to me you're competent? There are other externalities to this. Political instability cannot be underestimated, the influence that is having around investment. This is the third picture of a Prime Minister I've had in this position. I had to change it again from the last time I did this. The lack of diversity is a massive problem for the industry. You'll never change it while we have this lack of diversity. And basically, we're throwing away half the workforce when we have hundreds of thousands of vacancies. But I go to a lot of CBI calls and I hear from every single industry, they're not hundreds of people short, they're thousands, they're tens of thousands of people short. 1 million people disappeared out of the workforce following COVID. 1 million. Getting bits. This is less of a problem than it was before, I think, but it's still, certainly in terms of microchips, still a problem. And will continue to be. We go to the MCAA conference in the States every year where they're talking about reshoring, bringing manufacturing back to the US, making sure that things are made in the US. It's starting to break down those integrated international supply chains in a way that we haven't seen before. Brexit does not help at all. If you've taken 4% of GDP because of Brexit and investment has halved, that has to have an impact. The economy. Well, yeah, I've already said about that. It's pretty much flatlining, probably heading into recession. Doesn't mean to say our members are not busy, because they are, but there's a long lag. And once it does stop, it takes a long time to slow up again, to speed up again. And then there's international instability. So the war in Ukraine, who knows what the impact of that will continue to have, because this is not going to end very shortly. And what if China invaded Taiwan? Because things are getting more difficult for the Chinese leadership. And one good way, as Mr. Putin has demonstrated, is pick a war somewhere outside to galvanize your population if you're becoming unpopular. So, what does that mean? All of that together. Should we hunker down, or should we go for growth as a contractor? I am hoping, and I think it is beginning to happen, that there will be that culture change that Dame Judith asked for. We have to change. In the same way that health and safety changed from the turn of the century to now, it's completely different. You have to hope that actually compliance and competence becomes the norm, not the abnormality. What are we doing to prepare our members for this? To become a member of BESA, you have to prove your technical competence through a competence assessment standard. But competence will be on two levels that you will need to demonstrate. One is at a company level, and the second is at an individual level. We run the skill card system, which is aligned to CSCS. We have 68,000 skill card holders. And that will morph into from a card that recognizes qualification to a card that recognizes competence, because that's what you're going to have to evidence. And I think as a contractor, you will have to start to take much more thorough records about what you did. Not least because liability could be 30 years and you won't insure that. If you imagine 30 years of insurance cover, how old were you 30 years ago? Some of you weren't even born. I know where I was 30 years ago. I was in just about 30. I can't remember anything. Did we have faxes? Did we have emails? Certainly got no evidence of it. So you won't cover that for insurance, but 30 years of liability for your company. We focused on, can you do the job? We use Build UK's Common Assessment Standard because that does the business management review. It has 300 questions in it, but not a single question that says, can you do the job? Can you strangle pipework into a plant room? Can you design and install ventilation as you're supposed to do? So our bit says we'll accept the business management review from Build UK or Chaz or Construction Line, and we will simply do an audit on, can you do the job? Are you technically competent enough to do the job? And we're just about to throw out 29 members who cannot evidence that they meet that standard. Now that is counterintuitive because that's revenue to us, but we believe that there has to be a standard set. The bar's not desperately high, but it's a start. But you have to be able to evidence that. Now I would say, as a BSS, as you, who are members of BESA, that mitigates your risk to a degree because they've done the business management review and they're technically competent. So the chances are you're not going to get the hassle, the feedback of bad installations. Incidentally, most of them, and you know this, 80+% repeat work? They have some skin in the game in keeping their customers happy. It's not because they're forced to, it's because they believe in it. So that's what our focus. If you're a BESA member, can you do the job? We talk about the image of the industry, and lots of people, CLC, say we just need to improve the image of the industry. Most people's view of the industry is something like this. That's what they see next door to them. Has anybody had a construction project near where they live recently or near where they work? Could you put your hand up? Can you keep your hand up if it was a pleasant experience? It was a pleasant experience? Okay. Most people will put their hand up because it isn't. We disrupt, we're in people's faces. Most projects overrun. I think 2/3 of projects overrun. They're disorganized and they look a bit like that. So if we're just saying improve the image of the industry, that's kind of polishing turds. You need to deliver buildings on time, on budget, to the standard you said you would. The image will look after itself. I talked about my early days in submarines, the relevance of the skip will come in a minute. And I was in a submarine called HMS Walrus, and we did a refit in a dockyard in Rosyth. We went to sea, and we failed to meet a basic requirement of submarines. So there's a basic submarine equation, and that is this formula, A equals B, i.e. the number of dives must equal the number of surfaces. If it doesn't, it spoils your whole day. So submarines are, diving is good, sinking bad. So we opened main vents and we sank like a stone, and I can tell you it's really overrated when the water's pissing in and you're trying to bail out. We surfaced, did bail out or pumped out, went back to Rosyth Dockyard. The second time we went to sea, we took all the dockyard workers with us. Do you think it was watertight? It was. They have to have skin in the game, and that's what's lacking at the moment. So back to this skip. The jetty looked like this when we went to sea. It was like that. That's from a site, construction site near where I live. The tragedy of this, there's a school footpath, and that's where I took it from. Anybody who looks at that, parents, teachers, children, goes, yeah, that's the industry for me. But that's what most people see. So you need to improve the industry, not just the image of the industry. So, the final bit. Should we go for growth or should we hunker down? You could ask, why does this all matter? Why does it matter if we do the right thing? Our ambition is to inspire a better building engineering sector. Because if you get a better engineering services sector, you get a better built environment. And I'll explain why that's really important. With these figures, 20%, how much of the design has been completed? 20%. 200% energy performance gap. 2 suicides a day. 40%, it's actually higher than this, the amount of carbon emitted from the built environment. So if we get it right, you actually have a better built environment. You're helping to mitigate the climate crisis because you are delivering the amount of carbon you said you would do and energy. But crucially, 90% of us spend 90% of our time in a building. So therefore, the social benefit, the mental health benefit, the well-being of everybody improves if our members do the job properly, and you're able to do your job properly in supplying the right kit for the right project. So it really does matter. In the days when £1 billion was a lot of money, we spent 1.3 billion a year on the bad health outcomes of poor housing. I bet it's got worse, and that's a scandal. So my ask of you is that actually you help us to deliver better companies who deliver better buildings because they are competent and compliant, technically and as businesses. And if we can do that together, the outcome is fantastic. And that is easier to sell to young people who are coming into the industry than a dirty skip. Thank you. Okay. Any questions?
Hi. So one of the things that you said was about influencing the funders, because that's where everything starts. But equally, they are viewing it as a return on investment. How do how do you go back to the funders and talk about what you've just described?
Because that's about ESG and their environmental, social, and governance impact. And you actually, quite a big concern of those who own assets nowadays, you get a stranded asset. So they've got a building that is badly built, and suddenly it's worth half the amount it was before. And I think we're beginning to see that, certainly in the major cities, that actually if your building isn't up to scratch, you can't shift it, you can't demand the higher rent. So it's not that, it's like insurance. Insurance premiums aren't coming down for those companies who can evidence competence compliance. They're not going up. Those who can't, yeah, they're going up. So it's the same principle.
Very depressing, that presentation, but most enjoyable. Thank you very much. It strikes me that everybody wants to do the right thing, but it's not being policed. Are you optimistic that we are going to police it and we are going to get there?
Well, but I told you we bet the house on it. You know, competence assessment standard being made more robust is not a great business model if because you're driving people away who can't meet the standard. I have to believe in this. I thought I was being more optimistic at the end, actually saying, look what you can do if we get it right. What a fantastic thing happens. I think it will really depend. 2023 is the year when they're starting to enforce the Building Safety Act. And I think once a few people get prosecuted, high-level prosecutions for quite flagrant lack of adherence to it, then I think it will start to bite. Our members are seeing that now, but they're not recognising it as the Building Safety Act. They're just saying we're being asked to do this, we're being asked to do that. But it's the Building Safety Act that's driving that. So yeah, I am. This is the last job I'm going to do, and I want to make a difference. And we genuinely want to see a better industry. We're not for profit. Anything we make in our commercial side, we plough back into the development of apprenticeships, that sort of thing. You need all of this to work. Otherwise, if you don't care about the building, why would you bother to pay people? Why would you bother to worry about what skills they've got? So you don't need apprenticeships. None of these things matter unless you care about the product that you deliver. Well, thank you very much. Enjoyed that. Cheers.